is Deborah Burton, and I'm the Managing Director of the DevOps Agile Skills Association. And I am so excited about this special interview I have today with Dr. Kersten, the author of this amazing book, From Project to Product, and an old, wonderful contributor to DASA, Rick Farenhorst, who's the CIO of Transavia Airlines. Welcome, gentlemen. So happy to have you here today.
Great.
Great to be here.
So it would be great if you could just take a moment and introduce yourselves to our audience. Rick, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I joined IT roles 15 years ago after graduating in computer science. And if I look back, I have a rich career in that sense, because I started in academia, did a PhD there. I joined consulting firms afterwards in which I tried to, let's say, help them with getting more value out of IT. Those consulting firms had a big training part and curriculum as well, so I like sharing knowledge. So we did a lot of trainings and developed curricula as well, so it's a nice mix. I grew into leadership roles, so I learned to like leading people and building propositions and putting a company on the map. And then I joined a corporate. And before I also helped DASA to grow and play some entrepreneurial roles there as well. So it's actually a nice mix. And now I'm in a traditional enterprise, trying to see what we can do to get them accelerated and let them have more value out of IT, which is in any sector, but especially ours, very important to do. So great to be here.
All right, great to have you. And he's being really modest because his team at Xavier were absolutely fundamental to helping us build the DASA Competence Model. And we will always be greatly appreciative to Rick, and he's also the chairman of our DASA DevOps Enterprise Leadership Forum. So
definitely.
A real supporter of DASA, thank you. And Mick, could you please introduce yourself for our audience?
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of Tasktop, the author of Project to Product, and I've had a few different types of experiences as a software architecture researcher and programming language implementer, as a lot of open source. I've learned how different code is in open source and development is open source. But really the last decade, I've been working with many different enterprise IT organizations, so organizations with thousands or tens of thousands of IT staff, in trying to help them transform and really trying to understand what are the bottlenecks to transformation and how are we thinking about things the wrong way, and really how to chart out a path ahead to much more effective software delivery at scale.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Well, the audience probably knows by now that Mick and I had an opportunity to have a more detailed interview with his book. But what we want to talk about today, and what I'm thoroughly excited about, is having two folks that are absolutely living what's happening today in this whole digital transformation, seeing where the issues and bottlenecks are, having some questions around that that I think you'd be interested in listening to. So Rick, what's happening on the ground with Transavia Airlines? I know you're also in your transformational journey with the team and the things that you're doing there. Mick calls cars computers with wheels, and aren't airplanes computers with wings?
Definitely, more and more, I would say. But fortunately, we don't build aircraft, so in that sense, companies such as Boeing have their own challenges in that sense. But as an airline, it's getting more and more digital every day. So we see, especially in the market, to be competitive as a low-cost airline, you need to have proper customer journey facilities in place. People want to have one-click experiences when booking a ticket. They want no hassle when they check in. They want to have a good memory of their memorable moments during the flight, and we can't, let's say, have everything in control regarding arriving on time and the weather and the experiences people have on the plane itself. But we try to capture all those touch points as much as we can and facilitate it by digital capabilities. So Transavia as a whole is turning much more in an IT company every day. It's just that not every colleague of mine realizes this in the same way. But that's something I'm working on. And that's my role, to cultivate that culture and help people understand what kind of business impact and value you can make by doing IT in a smart way.
And Mick, are you seeing what Rick just described happening with other traditional IT organizations that are moving to work in a more digital way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the car analogy is a good one to what's happening, right? One thing is that the cars now have tons of software, 1 or 200 million lines of software, and even more coming with autonomous. But what's even, I think, more interesting and even more disruptive is the consumer relationship with mobility. So it's one thing that BMW is putting a bunch more software in the cars, but Share Now or Drive Now, those kinds of things are actually changing and making the consumer relationship with the car be through a mobile interface. And these kinds of changes will continue. So I think it's exactly the same thing. There's changes at sort of the device, the level of cars and planes, but the even bigger changes are how consumer relationships are changing. And those kinds of disruptions create this opportunity for other companies to come in between the consumer and a typical provider, right? This is it's called disintermediation, where a tech company, a startup, even a tech giant with the Apple Card will come in between a consumer and a financial service that they use. So I think the key thing that we're seeing is, as business leaders understand this more and more, the pressure to innovate and become basic technology innovators and have those software competencies become core to the business, not this thing that IT does on the side, is becoming tremendous.
So I see a lot of things happening the last 2 decades in terms of disruption. It feels like we've gone through that. And one of the things that you talk about in your book, Meg, is examples like Kodak and Blockbusters. They were also victims of disruption. Can you tell me what happened? As at one point they were the innovators. They were doing the things that they were supposed to do. And also in the book, I found it very interesting, you talked about the 4 economic sectors laid out by Zoltan Kinsey. So I want to get to that too, but tell me about what you saw happening with Kodak and Blockbuster.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we saw some interesting early warning signs, and one of them was Blockbuster, right? Where the media, the way that we were consuming videos at home changed very quickly, and the pace at which those video stores closed, apparently there's one left, was things always turn into a niche market, right? Just seemed very fast to us. And then we saw what happened with Nokia, and then we're seeing more things in retail. And as I studied this more and more, I realized that this disruption, even though we're kind of almost tuning it out right now, or many business leaders are, because they're hearing it so much, it's actually going to accelerate. And so the question is, how is it happening? How is it happening so quickly? And if it actually accelerates, where will that put your business? Where will that put your organization? And I realized also that an interesting thing is happening, because it's one thing where we're seeing it happen with very consumer-centric technologies, right? And we sort of have a sense for how mobile phones are changing things, how cloud services are changing things, but it actually is happening in every industry and in every sector. So we've got, even in the primary sectors of the economy, in these different sectors where you're talking about resource extraction, today's oil rigs, today's mining operations, they're now digital twins of entire oil rigs today, because the technology that's going into extracting oil, however you may feel about that, is actually all being powered by software. So disruption is just happening in every sector of every economy, and it's just a matter of time. The more competition there is, the closer it's to the consumer, the faster it's happened. But basically every large company, every large organization has to become a software innovator or start declining as someone else moves into their space. And we're now in a situation where, for the tech giants, those companies who want to keep growing, because they're basically continue tapping out their existing markets, they're going to start moving into adjacent markets. Maybe Amazon will move into pharmaceuticals or healthcare or become a bank at some point soon, right? Facebook has a banking license in the UK already, and are doing odd and interesting things with Libra. So they want to keep growing into adjacent sectors, and we're either going to end up with one of two worlds, right? Where they continue to do that because other companies are so slow to innovate, so slow to provide the kinds of experiences that consumers expect, some of the ones that you described, Rick. Or we're going to see those companies become innovators. The rest of the world economy learn from tech giants, learn from tech startups, learn from unicorns. And so I think we need to do everything that we can to help companies adopt those practices that will make them innovative. Or again, we will see disruption after disruption in sector after sector.
And in the Netherlands, Rick, we've had our share of disruption. Some of our companies that were iconic, V&A is gone. We've had other companies move into the Netherlands that have moved out, like Hudson Bay and Marks and Spencer's. All, I think, victim of what's happening in terms of disruption.
I think what's happening in the Netherlands is that we are a relatively tiny country, but we are relatively digital native. So many consumers quickly adopt the new retail platforms. I think many friends I have don't often go to a store anymore. So you see in some sectors that we are actually also with good internet and 4G and later 5G available. People are now growing up in a generation of having it one click away, basically. And I think we see in several sectors that as a result, consumers become more high demanding, and there was a shockwave in some sense for some companies that have been a bit too lazy, have been too reliant on their brand they had, their brand value in the Netherlands, but they are now one by one coming into problems. They're anxiously looking for ways to how to deal with this, actually survive this digital disruption, and with different success rates, basically. Some seem to quickly adopt an engineering culture and mindset and learn from the Facebooks and the Googles to create a culture where people thrive, and then the brand value helps to attract talented people because it's still cool to work for a big name in the Netherlands, and you still get the freedom and all the many of the perks that those tech giants have. But some other industries have much more difficulty to get out of this, let's say, traditional enterprise IT that they're carrying with them. And as a result, hampers the innovation and creating almost like a startup next to their core business. And there are all kinds of approaches used. When I talk from the DASA Enterprise Leadership Forum or the CIO platform in the Netherlands, I see many of my peers struggling with this. And it's partly a talent problem because it's hard to actually get the right people on the bus. It's also getting rid of all kinds of old school processes, and in your book you nicely talk about this project management thinking that is hampering change and innovation. But it's also the technological debt and the technological landscapes that those tech startups, on the first hand, they didn't have this problem because they could start greenfield, and as you also mention in your book, they also take the effort to sometimes re-platform and to continuously innovate themselves to continue to scale and to become effective. And that tech-driven mindset is something that is not often seen, I think, in a traditional enterprise, also not in the Netherlands. So this will be a big thing for companies, and I'm actually worried that more often than not, they don't realize how little time they have left to do this.
I agree.
And I think that's the whole sense of urgency, and it's just not in the Netherlands because, as you know, I travel around the globe meeting all types of business leaders and across industry. There's this feeling, this sense that they know they have to change, but one of the problems is, what do you change? And that's why in your book, Mick, I thought it made so much sense when you talk about, the flow framework and what they're missing in terms of aligning. If everything is software today, if software truly is driving our world, and that is so, yes?
Yes.
It's truly driving our world. If the software piece isn't aligned to the business piece, and you're missing that, that's a problem. But they don't know what they don't know. So how do you evangelize that? I mean, it's like doing things that we're doing now. But what's the type of advice that we can give senior leaders in terms of protecting their flank? Because you talk about in the book, the turning point, and there's not much time that's happening.
Yeah, I think, as Rick said, whether some leaders are slow to realize it, or there's just, they have a lot of legacy, they have more traditional businesses. Those things can be difficult, but I think the main thing that business leaders today already understand is how to manage and think about a portfolio. So I think if you're looking at a portfolio the wrong way, because the point project to product makes is, if you're looking at your portfolio as a set of activities and only tracking costs, you're not really going to be investing properly in software and in innovation. But if you look at your portfolio as a set of product value streams that deliver value to your customer, and you track the flow of that, the business results that come from that, you actually will have the right business mindset to invest in innovation, to not just think of IT as this cost center where you're throwing requirements, things over the fence, but to make IT actually a core competency of the business. And again, to have this business lens on that portfolio. So I think my whole view on it is, business leaders know how to do that. They just need a framework. They need a framework to be sort of above the layer of Agile and DevOps, which are key practices. But again, don't give the right kind of vocabulary or metrics to the business. And once we elevate that, and this is the entire goal of the Flow framework, today's leaders can be successful.
I think that that's exactly right. But how do you get them there? How do you get them to figure it out? Because it's not easy, right? And when you walk around, you mentioned it, they have legacy systems. We talk about culture, everybody talks about the cultural dynamics of change. Is it culture? Is it silo teams? How do we get them to understand that maybe some of the things that they're focusing on today are things that are hiding what's underneath?
Maybe to add on what you said, I was triggered by the fact that actually those business leaders already know how to run a portfolio. And I think that's indeed not the problem. What could be one of the issues is that they underestimate or are not fully aware of the value that can be generated by managing technology in a core value stream way. What I notice in many organizations in my prior life, but also at Transavia, is that there is a lot of thinking in IT as a hygiene factor, as a cost center, and if something stops running, they know who to point to. But that's not the same as seeing it as your core asset. And what helps, in my opinion, is to cross some boundaries or to build some bridges, make operating models also simpler, to let those business leaders also talk to the engineers. Put them in a room is sometimes already enough to let them figure out what are the key business drivers that they all should focus on, and not just the activity metrics and the more IT-oriented metrics that Agile teams still often focus on, but actually let them talk about how can we improve partner sales, or how can we improve the net promoter score of our passengers in an airline's case. And that helps to at least allow people to find each other and discuss how can we organize ourselves differently in such a way that we, in a multidisciplinary way, focus on value streams. I think that is actually a key thing that I took out from your book, and I like that a lot. It does require quite a significant change in structure and culture in an organization. It's about leadership and less silo-based thinking. It's also about maybe trusting the engineers and the technologists in your company and make them a bit more central to the equation, instead of the traditional command control management style where you, from a distance, run your traditional portfolio and different kind of assets.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think there's this knee-jerk reaction to blaming culture, and if you don't actually have this mindset that you're describing, Rick, where the engineers, everyone on the product value streams knows why they're working on the product value stream. And one of the key business results you might be after is increasing your passengers' net promoter score, right? But if everyone's bought into that, then you've got people thinking the right way in terms of coming up with creative solutions. Some of those solutions will come from some hackathon or something else. But the flip side that I think we're seeing much too often is that you've got these engineers who are working, they've been dumped this next set of requirements. Why are we taking so much longer than this other company? And then meanwhile, they're waiting for 4 weeks for some, 3 different executives to get into a room, approve some wireframes or approve some designs or approve some strategy piece, and then people, 4 weeks later, there's very little done, something takes a little bit longer, they wait on another set of meetings, and then people blame the culture of the engineers. So it's again, I think aligning everyone around customer value is the solution to this, right? Establishing those value streams and making everyone bought in to delivering those business results.
It's very interesting what you were just talking about, because in the book you talk about Equifax, and when that breach happened, and of course the CEO lost his position, the person that was blamed for it was the programmer. That's kind of unheard of, isn't it? That
I wish it were unheard of. But because it just seems so insane to me reading this news. And it's, I think, a little bit similar to what you're saying, Rick, right? Is that we see this everywhere, right? IT's blamed for outages, for incidents, and so on, and it's just thought of as this cost center where things break, rather than, again, something you invest in, where you invest in the operation platform, you invest in monitoring technologies, and so on. You invest in reducing technical debt. So, myself as a former engineer who's actually used this framework that caused all the problems called struts, I'm reading this, I'm thinking that, this is so obvious. If you don't allow the teams to actually invest in reducing tech debt, modernizing their architecture, upgrading things, you just push features down onto them all the time in these ever-growing backlogs, of course you get this result. But then the thing that was crazy to me is the CEO in, I believe it was the congressional hearing, saying, oh, this was the fault of one developer.
right.
Right? This to me would be like the CEO of a car company saying, oh, one of our floor staff tripped over a power cord, which is why we missed revenue results by 20%. It makes no sense, because when you actually have a systems mindset, a systems thinking mindset, you realize that you need to have the right kind of organizational structure, culture, and measurement, and prioritization that will prevent this kind of thing from happening. It's never the fault of a single developer.
Right.
So the fact that happened made me realize this is how broken the mindset of a leader of a really large company whose core business is security and privacy of US and some Canadian citizens. This is how flawed his thinking around technology is. That you can blame a developer for this kind of outage.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I recognize the example a bit. It's partly due, I guess, to the fact the lack of knowledge again on what is the impact of certain well-intended behavior to focus on new features, bring them a low time to market, outpace the competition, and get some MVP life. But if you, for example, in a traditionally organized company, command and control management styles are still often seen, then sometimes the engineers have great ideas, and if they got the liberty to actually focus on what's most valuable, then they would do it. But they are feeling, at least they have the perception to be forced to work on getting things live. And what we saw also in Transavia some time ago is that we needed a better dialogue with also the business leaders and the product owners and the specialists involved to get a better feeling what kind of value should be associated to not only just the story point or actual feature brought live to production, but also solving some technical debt or actually preventing some cybersecurity threat to happen in the first place. And that discussion helped us to make it less about them against us, less about the IT did it wrong, and makes it a more first-class citizen in the equation. We're not there yet, but there are mechanisms to let also business leaders understand what kind of indeed value those capabilities constitute.
And as the architect, one of the architects of the DASA DevOps Competence Model, we talk about autonomous teams that are in charge of a product or service from concept to grave. And is that resonating in the market? Do you see, with the DevOps movement and the power and everything going digital, are you seeing people actually beginning to work more effectively that way? Or is it just still the big tech companies that don't have all the burden of, a more traditional IT way of working that are struggling with this?
I've seen it working, and Transavia we focus also more on value streams and create more end-to-end responsible product teams who are multidisciplinary. So there are infrastructure engineers joining people from the commercial department, business analysts, solution architects in the same team, and we make sure they're not too large, so they still can work with the standard agile practices and have some high velocity. So that is helping, but to actually really make it valuable, we also needed to look at the overarching system and the governance model in place, where Still, it sometimes happens that a business leader drops in and requires a button on the website to be removed from the left to the right part, and then the team typically said, yes sir, and they did it. And what you hope for is that also the team feels the liberty to maybe ask the why question behind that request, and also at least have a dialogue about the impact of that decision that completely violates perhaps the backlog prioritization and the other things the team wanted to work on. And this is, I think, in tech companies a bit more advanced because the engineers are much more seen as a core asset, and in traditional enterprises, when you look at not only salaries but also perks and the way IT or digital is perceived, it's much less of a core thing. So people from IT don't feel that they are actually the ones that should defend certain non-functional requirements and quality things, and they refrain from actually standing up to those requests, which keeps it as is, because the business leaders actually want and are open, in my opinion, often to that argument, and then they are the first ones to say, okay, I trust you, let's do it differently then. But that kind of mechanism is something that is more difficult to change overnight. So it's not so much the team skills and attitude. I have big trust in that those technical experts can figure it out, and they like to work in multidisciplinary teams, but we need to give them some space actually to work like that, and not make it an agile team, call them end-to-end responsible, but then still have all kinds of traditional management styles around them.
Yeah, I think in my experience, matches this very closely, especially as of late. So what I've been suggesting to organizations, especially the larger ones, is the product value streams need a high level of autonomy. So I think it's perfectly, back to your previous point, Rick, I actually think it's perfectly okay for the business just to want more and more features, because in the end, that's what's going to make you competitive. That's what's going to make you win in the market. It's just that you set that North Star at an organization level where we're going to become the best at this. We're going to increase our net promoter score by X. And then it's on the product value streams, which tend to be composed of between 1 and 10 feature teams. They need to be bigger, they need to be relevant to the business than a single feature team, to determine how they deliver that. Because they're the only ones who will actually understand the trade-off between technical debt investment and architectural work and the features. And so they might realize that the best way to deliver on the company's annual plan is to spend 6 months improving the security architecture, right? Improving some piece of architecture, and then that will give them a higher feature velocity by the end of the year than if they didn't do that. So those trade-offs need to be made, because in the end, you need to, I think, as you're saying, Rick, you need to make that product development engineering culture core. That's how you're going to innovate. Right. In the end, though, those product value streams need to deliver feature to the business.
True.
So it's this balance, and I think the way you do it, again, is giving that autonomy. With that autonomy comes this responsibility, and responsibility to make the right kinds of trade-offs, right? I've seen this fail completely as well, when the responsibility goes the wrong way, and engineers or teams will spend a year over-architecting. Yeah. And then the business needs to pivot because something changed in the market.
And then they lose trust to give autonomy again.
And then they lose trust, yeah, exactly. So I think it's that balance and this constant, monthly, at minimum quarterly, understanding of what's been delivered, where are the bottlenecks, where is the flow. That's critical to have business leaders and technologists interlocking regularly, whether you use PI planning with SAFe or whether you use something else. I think this is critical.
Right.
Nice. Yeah.
So if you look forward to the way organizations can get started, I would encourage them to, number one, take an opportunity to read your book, because you detail in the flow framework very much how you can bring an organization and align what's happening in the software world with the business world. And as a senior executive out there going through the activities that you're doing today, I think being open to it, understanding change is a coming, and embracing that and trying to bring your people along is also a key asset of what you're trying to get at. Any last words from my audience before I let you go?
I would like to compliment you on the book. It's actually, I ordered it a few times, a number of times now for colleagues. And I think it's actually providing a nice roadmap for starting or improving this transformation attempt. I personally, from experience and also at Transavia, I see that all kinds of key ingredients are often in place. So we have invested in agile ways of working. We have now product owners really from the various business lines that they really think more than in the past about being their own entrepreneur, basically. We are working on disentangling the monolithic system landscape we still have in some parts of the company. We are investing in cloud computing, and we really want to grow an engineering mindset and culture in the company. But what we often lack, and I know from discussion with peers, is that Transavia is not alone in this, is that it's also about not just all the ingredients, but also the complete recipe. And I think the flow framework could be a very nice way to help you connect some dots and to show you how, in a relatively simple way, focusing on specific metrics, you can do this. So I actually like that a lot. So great to have met you and discussed a bit.
No, that's great to hear, Rick. And I think that really was my goal, right? Is you already understand the importance of cloud. You already understand the importance of agile ways of working and DevOps automation and so on. And really, where I've been so happy to see this book resonate is to help elevate that message to the business as a whole. Because the fact that you get those practices and the fact that other technology leaders get those practices doesn't yet mean the business has adjusted to understanding that those are key to how they're going to operate going forward. So that's great to hear that that's working.
Nice.
Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you so much for spending this time with me. I am sure that all of our members are delighted to have an opportunity to hear from you and your real world journeys. And you know, for our audience, if you haven't read this book, I cannot encourage it more. If you are out there thinking about what do you need to transform your organization, start here, because Mick really takes you through a step-by-step idea of the threats that are out there, but the things that you can do to thrive and grow in a world that's driven by software. Thank you, everybody. Till the next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah.